KLM and Pan Am's Boeing 747s are preparing to land at Los Rodeos Airport, but the airport is already facing a lot of problems. Heavy fog and heavy rain have engulfed the airport. Visibility is so poor that it is very difficult for the pilots to distinguish between runways and taxiways. The heavy traffic has led to a queue of planes on the taxiways. The Pan Am plane that was on the taxiway has now moved to the main runway, but the KLM pilots are unaware that the Pan Am plane is on the same runway as they are preparing for takeoff. Communication glitches and misunderstandings have made the situation even more tense. The KLM pilots get the takeoff clearance, but have no idea about the Pan Am plane already on the runway. Both planes are now accidentally planes. The pilots are getting too close to each other. The time they have to make decisions is rapidly decreasing. With every passing second, the risk of an accident is increasing. If the pilots do not make the right decision in the next few minutes, the biggest plane crash in history can happen. Will they be able to stop their plane safely? Or will this day go down in history forever? This is the story of the Tenerife airport disaster. March 27th, 1977 began like a normal day. Captain Victor Grubb and his team took off for Pan American Airlines Flight 1736 at John F. Kennedy International Airport in New York. Flight 1736 originated from Los Angeles International Airport with a stop at JFK Airport in New York. It was a Boeing 747 aircraft named Clipper Victor. It was the first. The 747 was the first aircraft to be delivered to an airline, and the first 747 model took off for commercial flight on the 22nd of January, 1970. Pan Am Flight 747 was commanded by Captain Victor Grubb, who was 56 years old. He was accompanied by First Officer Robert L. Bragg and Flight Engineer George Vanis. This team of experienced pilots had a combined total of 47,000 flight hours. The team was flying from New York to Las Palmas. Las Palmas is the capital of the Canary Islands, located on the Gran Canaria Island. This island is located about 100 kilometers west of the coast of Maray and is a center of attraction for tourists from Europe and around the world due to its tropical and subtropical climate. There were 380 passengers on board, most of whom were of retirement age. After arriving in New York, the 14 passengers and crew were replaced by the new crew, which included Captain Victor Grubb, First Officer Robert Bragg, and Flight Engineer George Vanis. The flight was delayed by 45 minutes in New York, delaying the flight to Las Palmas. At 7:45 a.m., Pan Am Flight 1736 took off from New York's JFK International Airport. At the same time, the crew of KLM Royal Dutch Airlines Flight 4805 also began their journey at Amsterdam's Schiphol Airport. KLM Flight 4805 was a Boeing 747.
Most of the passengers were Dutch, and there were also 4 Germans, 2 Austrians, and 2 Americans who had been on board for a few days. KLM Flight 4805 was commanded by Captain Jacob Veldhuyzen van Zanten, 50 years old, along with First Officer Klaus Myers and Flight Engineer William Schroeder. This flight was also chartered by Holland International Travel Group and was to reach Gran Canaria Airport. The destination of both flights was Gran Canaria Airport, the largest airport in the Canary Islands. But on the same day, a group called MPAIAC was demanding independence for the island. This group was resorting to both violent and non-violent methods to achieve its goals. 2 young men from the same group entered the terminal building of Gran Canaria Airport and left a bag near a flower shop. A short time later, a desk clerk received a call from a representative of the MPAIAC, in which it is said that bombs have been placed in the terminal building, and they have 15 minutes to evacuate the building. After 15 minutes, the bomb kept in the bag explodes, which damages the terminal building and injures 4 people. The authorities have to assume that there may be more bombs in the building, so it is decided to stop all flights. Due to the airport being closed, both the flights were diverted from Gran Canaria Airport to Los Rodeos, 110 kilometers behind, which is now known as Tenerife Airport. The Pan Am flight asked for permission to hover for some time over Gran Canaria, but the authorities instructed all the planes to land at Los Rodeos. This was an unexpected and challenging situation. Now, these two huge planes and their passengers at the airport of Los Rodeos had to face a new situation, which would change their lives forever. At the time of the incident, the KLM flight was in a holding pattern over Las Palmas. Due to a bomb explosion at Gran Canaria Airport, the plane was ordered to be diverted to Los Rodeos Airport. The KLM flight lands at Los Rodeos Airport at 1:30 a.m. When the KLM flight was diverted to Los Rodeos Airport instead of Las Palmas, they parked their plane on the north side apron. The apron is the area at the airport where planes are parked and loaded and unloaded. It is between the runway and the taxiway. At this time, Pan Am Flight 1736 was also in a holding pattern a few thousand feet above the KLM plane. The Pan Am flight also landed at Los Rodeos Airport 37 minutes after the KLM flight at 2:15. When the KLM flight arrived at Los Rodeos Airport, Captain Van Zanten initially thought that the passengers should stay on the plane, but after 20 minutes, it became clear that the delay would be long, so the passengers were allowed to go into the terminal building. The passengers on the Pan Am plane also asked to go into the terminal, but they were told that the terminal building was already full, so they stayed on the plane. All flights at Los Rodeos Airport were diverted to Gran Canaria Airport.
This made both the apron and taxiway very congested. In 1977, Tenerife's only airport, Los Rodeos, was a short, simple runway airport located at an altitude of 2,000 feet above sea level. Tenerife's Los Rodeos Airport is located in a mountainous region where the weather changes very quickly. Fog can come up suddenly and affect visibility. Visibility can be 2 or 3 kilometers at one moment, and after 3 minutes, it can be as low as 100 meters. When both planes arrived in Tenerife, the weather was clear, but it quickly started changing. In 1965 and between 1968 and 1970, there was an average of 1 accident per year, killing 98 people. A few years before this disaster, another serious accident had occurred, which led to the decision to build a new airport in the southern part of Tenerife, where the weather was better. This airport usually served small jet aircraft. However, on this day, things were different. After the bombing at Gran Canaria Airport, an endless stream of planes headed for Los Rodeos. The number of planes at the airport had increased so much that the main taxiways were filled. The situation was even more complicated for the KLM pilots. The strict duty time limits recently introduced in the Netherlands had made them concerned that they could face serious legal consequences if they did not reach Amsterdam on time. So Captain Jacob Van Zanten decided that the flight from Gran Canaria to Amsterdam would be delayed. The flight was to be filled with an additional 55,000 liters of fuel to save time on arrival, but this decision made his plane heavier at 15, which made it even more risky. This would mean that he would need more speed to take off later, and a longer flight distance. At 2:30, just minutes after Captain Van Zandt began refueling his jet, he was informed that Gran Canaria Airport was now open again and that he could take off. Captain Grubb of the Pan Am flight heard the same message and asked for a restart, but was told that the KLM flight was now at the end of the taxiway and was being refueled, which would make it difficult to pass it. The captain of the Pan Am flight could not even turn his plane around because the taxiway was too narrow, but there was not enough space. This decision further delayed their departure. Pan Am's pilots and passengers, who had already been waiting for several hours, became even more impatient. KLM's pilots needed to leave as soon as possible, but everything was getting complicated. Pan Am's plane would have to overtake the KLM flight to enter the runway and back up for departure. Pan Am would have to wait until KLM's refueling was complete. The KLM flight took about 35 minutes to refuel, and then the passengers were brought back on board. 4 members of a Dutch family were missing, and it took longer to find them. Eventually, all the passengers on the KLM flight were unable to board the plane. A Dutch tour guide, Robina van Lanschot, decided to go home from the airport without permission. And it was a decision that saved her life. She did not know that she would be the only survivor of the KLM flight's 249 passengers and crew. The weather at Los Rodeos Airport began to deteriorate rapidly during the afternoon. The position of the island of Tenerife was such that sea breezes from the Atlantic blew directly onto the island, making the weather conditions unpredictable, especially in the area between the island's two mountains. Clouds rapidly covered Los Rodeos Airport. When the KLM flight began refueling after 4 p.m., the visibility at the airport had already decreased due to the clouds. The pilots of both planes were well aware that if the visibility deteriorated further, they might have to stay in Tenerife overnight. The KLM captain lined up the plane on the runway. His co-pilot, Mears, told him to stop overnight, reminded that they have not yet received permission to take off from air traffic control, to which the captain replied, "Yes, I know." After this, the co-pilot radioed the tower that they are ready for takeoff and are waiting for ATC's clearance. ATC radioed the KLM plane, informing it of the route after takeoff, but takeoff was not permitted. The ATC used the word takeoff in the clearance, which led the captain to believe that takeoff was permitted. The co-pilot read this clearance back to the controller and said, "We are now on takeoff." But it was not clear whether he said, "We are on takeoff" or "We are taking off." The captain interrupted and said, "We are going." The controller could not see the runway due to fog and lack of ground radar, which led to confusion in communication and increased the chances of an accident. The controller initially replied, "Okay," which led the captain to believe that takeoff was permitted. The controller's okay response may have been due to a misunderstanding that the KLM aircraft was in a position to take off, but the controller immediately added, "Wait for takeoff. I will call you," which made it clear that the ATC had not given the aircraft permission to take off. The Pan Am crew made a simultaneous call on the radio, which caused interference on the radio frequency, and a loud 3-second sound was heard in the KLM cockpit. Due to this interference, the KLM crew could not hear the important part of the tower's response. The Pan Am crew's message was, "We are still taxiing on the runway Clipper 1736. But this message also could not reach the KLM crew due to interference. If this message had been heard by the KLM captain, then the KLM crew would have known the situation and they would have aborted the takeoff. Due to fog, the crews of both the aircraft could not see each other on the runway. There was no ground radar on the runway, so they could not be seen from the control tower either. The tower instructed the Pan Am crew that when they were on the runway, they should not taxi. Pan Am pilots responded, "Okay, we will report when we are cleared." On hearing this, the KLM flight engineer asked his pilots, "Is the Pan Am plane clear?" The captain of the KLM flight asserted yes, and continued with the takeoff. The pilots of the KLM flight thought the Pan Am plane had left the runway and began the takeoff. But in fact, the Pan Am plane was still on the runway. The Pan Am plane was taxiing on the runway and was trying to exit through the third exit. But due to fog and the complexity of the runway, they were unable to reach the correct exit and remained on the runway. Just 11 seconds before the collision, the Pan Am captain looked out of his windshield and suddenly saw the KLM plane's headlights. At first, he thought the plane was stationary, but soon he realized that the plane was stationary. It is understood that it is moving fast towards them. In panic, they shouted, "Oh God, it is coming towards us." When they saw the speed of the KLM plane, Captain Grubb shouted loudly, "God, it is coming." And First Officer Bragg shouted, "Move, move." First Officer Braggs immediately reacted and said, "Get down, get down." The captain tried to turn the plane towards the grassy area, but the weight of his plane was about 340 tons, due to which it became very difficult to turn it quickly. Due to the low speed and high weight of the plane, they could not move away from the runway quickly. As soon as the captain of the KLM plane saw the Pan Am plane, he immediately tried to lift his plane up, but they had already crossed the V1 speed, and it was no longer possible to stop them. The KLM plane was about 100 tons ahead of Pan Am. The KLM plane was about meters away and moving at a speed of about 260 kilometers per hour. In desperation, he tried to raise the nose of the plane so that the Pan Am plane could pass him, due to which there were marks of metal rubbing on the runway. But by then, it was too late. The KLM plane was at full speed and collided with the Pan Am plane. The KLM jet fell back on the runway, and all 248 people on board were killed. The collision was so severe that all the people on board the KLM plane were killed instantly, while the Pan Am plane caught fire, and 335 out of 396 people on board were killed. Meanwhile, the air traffic controller was startled by the sound of 2 explosions. The air traffic control did not know that a very terrible accident had already happened. The memories of the bomb blast at Grand Canada were still.
Terrorists have attacked again. A pilot whose plane was parked at the airport said that he could see fire in the fog, but the location and source was not clear. When the controller tried to contact both the planes and got no response, he realized that something terrible had happened. Hearing this, the air traffic controller immediately pressed the alarm button and sent the rescue team to the runway. The airport's firefighters immediately rushed towards the fire. Due to the thick layer of fog, the firefighters had to drive their vehicles very carefully to ensure that they do not accidentally run over anyone. As they approached the accident site, the first thing they felt was extreme heat. Upon reaching there, they saw that the structure of the KLM flight was completely burning on the runway. They immediately started to extinguish the fire, but no one could do anything. There was little hope of survival. A few minutes later, when the fog cleared a little, they saw another fire, about 450 meters behind. At first, they thought that this was also part of KLM, but on reaching there, the flight first said that 327 out of 396 people were killed. But later, this number was changed to 335, because many of the injured also did not survive. In the end, only 61 people survived, including all the Pan Am pilots. A total of 583 people were killed. This became the worst air tragedy of all time, surpassing the 1974 crash of Turkish Airlines Flight 981, in which 346 people were killed. The accident left people in California and the Netherlands in deep mourning. Los Rodeos Airport was closed for 2 days after the accident. Spanish Army troops worked to clear the debris from the crash site. The airport was reopened when runway repairs were completed. The horrific accident shook the world, and an immediate investigation began. Fortunately, the cockpit voice recorders and flight data recorders of both planes were soon recovered. Investigation of the accident in Spain, civil aviation accident for investigators of the End Incident Investigation Commission. The accident was a nightmare. With 2 large planes colliding with each other, the crash site was horrific. Burning wreckage of the Pan Am plane was scattered across the runway, and parts of the KLM plane were scattered over several hundred meters. It was difficult to understand how this happened, and who was responsible. The investigation involved 70 personnel, including representatives from the United States, the Netherlands, and both airlines. The facts revealed that there were misunderstandings and misconceptions before the accident. Analysis of the CVR transcript showed that the KLM pilot thought he had permission to take off, while the Los Dios control tower believed the KLM plane was waiting for takeoff clearance at the end of the runway. The central question was why KLM was so terrified. Why did Captain Jacob Van Zanten take off without permission? He was one of KLM's most respected pilots and the head of KLM's Boeing 747 training program. Investigators believed that having flown almost exclusively on training flights for the past 10 years, he was unaware that he was flying without waiting for orders. The accident also involved a series of misunderstandings. The KLM co-pilot contacted the controller and requested both permission to take off and ATC clearance in the same message. Both KLM pilots believed the Pan Am plane was no longer on the runway and that they would receive permission shortly.
However, the controller only gave ATC clearance, but used the word takeoff in the message, which led Captain Van Zanten to believe he had permission to take off. And this misunderstanding led to the accident. Moments before the incident, another conversation had taken place between the Pan Am crew and the controller, which could have given another chance to avoid this accident. When Pan Am's first officer said, "We will report when we are clear," he was trying to convey that they were still on the runway. But the KLM crew failed to understand this important information. When many people are talking at once, the brain searches for the words that are important to the listener. In this case, the KLM crew would have been alerted by hearing the Clipper call sign, but the controller addressed Pan Am 1736 with the NATO alphabet call sign Papa Alpha in its last transmission, which did not catch the attention of the KLM pilot. Only flight engineer Schroeder understood the message. One of the possible reasons for this accident could be that the junior crew members were not experienced pilots like Van Zanten. Schrader was overly trusting of Van Zanten, who believed that it was not possible for Van Zanten to make such a basic mistake as taking off with another aircraft on the runway Van Zanten had recently given Myers his Boeing 747 type rating. And Schrader was probably of the view that the role of flight engineers should be limited to looking after aircraft systems and not be involved in operational decisions. The result was that the crew members were confused and began to think that Van Zanten was right and that they themselves were wrong. However, when a person is under pressure, his decision-making ability can be affected, no matter how experienced. Captain Van Gentel was under particularly intense pressure that day. KLM crew were concerned about strict duty time rules, deteriorating weather, and flight delays. Van Gentel had also heard from his wife about her concerns. I had also told him that he would be worried if he saw the news of a bombing. The captain had been on duty all day and was probably tired. It was clear from KLM's cockpit voice recording that Captain Van Zanten was not closely following the communication between First Officer Myers and air traffic control during taxiing and takeoff. In fact, he had to repeatedly ask for clarification. Van Zanten, who had been working in a training environment for many years, had the expectation that he would receive clearance to take off as soon as he received the clearance. So when he heard the controller use the word take off, he was completely convinced that he had received clearance to take off. According to the Spanish final report, most of the blame was placed on KLM's captain, Jacob Van Zanten. The report said that the accident was caused by KLM's Captain Van Zanten taking off without permission from ATC and attempting to land despite being informed that the Pan Am plane was on the runway.
The Dutch response was equally suspicious of the report and portrayed Van Zanten as completely innocent. Dutch investigators said the accident was caused by a systems failure, not an individual mistake. The Dutch investigation looked deeply into how such an experienced captain could have made such a bad decision. They noted communication gaps between the cockpit crew and ATC, language barriers, and possible distraction of the air traffic controller. The ATC tapes contain noises that suggested the controller may have been watching a football match. The Tenerife crash, which killed 583 people, is considered one of the deadliest incidents in aviation history. There were many contributing factors to the accident, including sudden fog that severely reduced visibility, difficulty hearing messages due to simultaneous radio transmissions, and vague phrases used by KLM's first officer, such as, "We are on takeoff." The Pan Am aircraft also did not leave the runway from the third exit, as instructed, resulting in a runway collision. As a result of this tragedy, several important changes were made to aviation procedures. The word takeoff is now only used when an actual takeoff clearance is received, and mutual understanding is confirmed between pilots and ATC to ensure clarity in communication. The accident also promoted the concept of crew resource management, which emphasizes teamwork and open communication in the cockpit. A new airport was also opened on the island of Tenerife after this incident, and a memorial was erected at the accident site, which reminds us of the depth of this tragedy and its impact on aviation safety.
Thanks for watching World Trending Wave. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe channel.